Let's cross live to Kiev and correspondent Gulliver Cragg. Gulliver, what's the latest?
Well, the judge has gone into his deliberating chamber in order to make his decision. The prosecutors demanding the equivalent of 31 million euros in bail for Petro Poroshenko. Now we're waiting to see whether or not the judge will go along with that or ask for less bail or perhaps adjourn the hearing. So basically, those who are following this closely are rather on tenterhooks right now to see what the result of this day's court session is going to be. Meanwhile, there are still supporters of Petro Poroshenko outside the courtroom, rather fewer than there were this morning, but certainly the president made this into a sort of political rally for him and his party, with various members of the party making speeches and sort of trying to conjure up the spirit of Maidan, comparing even the current president, Volodymyr Zelensky, to Vladimir Putin, and saying all these kinds of patriotic slogans. Even I heard a speaker from the stage saying, "This dark night will end soon." Strangely, nobody seemed to mention the fact that Volodymyr Zelensky was elected with 73% of the vote in 2019. And although there were some very passionate supporters of Petro Poroshenko outside the courtroom today, there are also supporters of Volodymyr Zelensky who the president thinks are going to be applauding this move to jail Petro Poroshenko, however politically motivated it might rather obviously seem to be.
Yeah, because when Zelensky runs for president, he does it on an anti-corruption platform. But the charges against Poroshenko, they're of supporting the wrong side in the standoff with Russia.
Yeah, I think that Volodymyr Zelensky thinks that his supporters will kind of put all of that into the same bucket. And although these charges don't explicitly actually make the link between these two things, Petro Poroshenko has not only been accused of buying coal from the from the areas of Ukraine that are controlled by the Russian-backed forces, he has also, by investigative journalists at the very least, if not by prosecutors, been accused of somehow profiting from schemes whereby Ukraine was buying cheaper coal than it was telling ordinary consumers it was buying, and electricity and utilities prices in Ukraine went up massively under Petro Poroshenko. That's partly because of the IMF's requirement that the country cut subsidies. But I think that the Zelensky administration reckons that the average Ukrainian voter doesn't really understand these subtleties. They believe that Petro Poroshenko put prices up whilst at the same time profiting from it, and that they're angry with him because of that. But as Petro Poroshenko himself pointed out from the courtroom, this all looks very, very bad for Ukraine, because this is very clearly an unreformed court system with a prosecutor who's a political ally of Volodymyr Zelensky going after Volodymyr Zelensky's political predecessor. And even if Petro Poroshenko might be guilty of some instances of corruption or of acting outside of the law in his decision to buy coal from these areas, that's debatable. What's not really debatable is that there are many more corrupt business people in Ukraine who have not been prosecuted. And Volodymyr Zelensky might think he's keeping a campaign promise by prosecuting the one who happens to be his political predecessor. But I think not only supporters of Petro Poroshenko, but a rather wider contingent of the Ukrainian electorate think that that is really not a very good look for Ukraine internationally.
Yeah, and tell us just about the timing of Poroshenko's decision to return home.
Well, Petro Poroshenko decided to return home on the same day that Alexei Navalny decided to return home from Russia. This is all part of his attempt to portray Volodymyr Zelensky as some kind of authoritarian leader comparable to Vladimir Putin. That was the tone that some of the speakers from the stage, supporters of Petro Poroshenko and members of his party, were taking today. I mean, whatever you might want to say about Volodymyr Zelensky, to compare him to the kind of authoritarian figure that Vladimir Putin represents does seem to be quite a major escalation. Volodymyr Zelensky was elected in an election that was deemed by international observers to have been free and fair. That is, of course, not the case for Vladimir Putin in Russia.
All right, and while this showdown taking place between the current and former presidents of Ukraine, many thanks, Gulliver